There is a unique and terrible fascination that we, as a society, have with the figure of the serial killer. They are the modern-day monsters, the real-life bogeymen who walk among us, hidden behind a mask of normalcy. We dissect their lives, their motives, their methods, in countless books, documentaries, and podcasts. We do this, perhaps, as a way to understand the incomprehensible, to put a name and a face to the darkest capabilities of the human soul. When a killer is caught, when they are identified and brought to justice, there is a sense of order restored. The monster is caged. The story, however tragic, has an ending. The book is closed. But what about the stories that have no ending? What about the monsters who were never caged? There exists a gallery of phantoms in the annals of true crime, shadowy figures who terrorized communities, claimed multiple lives, and then simply faded away, leaving behind a legacy of fear and a string of cold cases that have haunted generations of detectives. These are the uncaught killers. They are more than just criminals. They are enigmas. They are ghosts who taunted the police, played games with the media, and then vanished, taking their secrets with them. These are the cases that linger, that fester in the public consciousness, because the lack of resolution is a special kind of torment. The monster is still out there. Or perhaps he died of old age, a quiet grandfather living down the street, his dark secrets buried with him. Or perhaps, most chillingly, he simply stopped. Tonight, we will delve into the shadows to hunt for these ghosts. We will analyze the cases of 3 of the most infamous and elusive serial killers who were never brought to justice. We will start in the psychedelic haze of 1960s California, to confront a killer who turned his murders into a terrifying media spectacle. We will then travel to the windswept barrier islands of modern-day New York, to uncover a sprawling mystery that began with a single missing person and spiraled into the discovery of a killer's hidden graveyard. And finally, we will journey to the industrial heartland of Ohio in the 1930s, to investigate a series of gruesome butcheries so horrific they were attributed to a real-life Sweeney Todd. These are the stories of the killers who got away. Our hunt must begin with the most famous uncaught killer of them all. He is not just a murderer. He is a brand, a cultural icon of terror. He gave himself a name, created a costume, and invented a new kind of terror, one that played out not just in dark lovers' lanes, but on the front pages of newspapers and on the television screens of a terrified public. This, of course, is the story of the Zodiac killer. The story of the Zodiac begins in the late 1960s, in Northern California. It was the era of the summer of love, a time of peace, free love, and psychedelic exploration. But beneath this veneer of hippie idealism, a dark and violent countercurrent was flowing. The Manson family murders would soon shock the world, and a new kind of predator was about to emerge, one who would replace the flower with a gun and the peace sign with a cryptic, cross-haired symbol. The first canonical Zodiac attack occurred on the night of December 20th, 1968, on a remote, dark road in Benicia. 2 high school students, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were on their first date. They had parked their car in a well-known local lover's lane. Sometime that night, another car pulled up beside them. A man got out armed with a .22 caliber pistol. He shot David Faraday once in the head, killing him instantly. Betty Lou Jensen managed to flee the car, but she didn't get far. The killer shot her 5 times in the back as she ran. It was a brutal, execution-style murder with no apparent motive. Robbery was ruled out, as nothing was taken. The police were baffled. It was a senseless, tragic, but at the time, isolated crime. 7 months later, on the 4th of July, 1969, the killer struck again. Another young couple, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, were parked in a similar lover's lane in Vallejo, just a few miles from the first crime scene. A car pulled up behind them, its headlights blinding them. A man approached the passenger side door, shining a bright flashlight into their faces. Without a word, he opened fire with a 9mm pistol, shooting both of them multiple times. He then calmly walked back to his car and drove away. Darlene Ferrin died from her injuries. Michael Mageau, despite being shot in the face, neck, and chest, miraculously survived. He was able to give police the first description of the killer: a white male, short and heavyset with a large face. This second attack was followed by something new, something that would define the case and elevate it from a series of brutal murders to a national obsession. About 40 minutes after the shooting, a man called the Vallejo Police Department. The call was traced to a payphone just a few blocks from the police station. The man's voice was calm, monotone, and chilling. He spoke in a slow, deliberate cadence, as if reading from a script. He said, "I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of Columbus Parkway. They were in a white car. I'm the one who did it." He then added, "I also killed those kids last year." He was taking credit for both attacks. The Phantom had given himself a voice. But he was not content with just a voice. He wanted a name and a platform. On August 1, 1969, 3 identical letters arrived at the offices of 3 different Bay Area newspapers: the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. The letters were a stunning confession. The author claimed responsibility for the 2 attacks, providing details that only the killer could have known. He proved he was the real deal. But the letters contained something else, something that would become his trademark. Each letter included 1/3 of a 408-symbol cryptogram, a cipher, and he included a chilling demand: publish the cipher on the front page of your newspapers, or he would go on a killing rampage that weekend and cruise around killing lone people in the night. The newspapers, after consulting with the police, complied. The cipher was published. The entire Bay Area, and soon the entire country, was captivated and terrified. Who was this man who murdered innocent people and then sent coded messages to the press? Just over a week later, the cipher was solved, not by the FBI or the NSA, but by a high school history teacher from Salinas, Donald Hardin, and his wife, Betty. The message, when decoded, was a rambling, misspelled, and deeply narcissistic tirade. It read, in part, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience." He also wrote that the people he killed would be his slaves in the afterlife. And it was in his next letter, sent on August 4th, that he gave himself his name. The letter began with the words, "This is the Zodiac speaking." He had created his own brand of terror, complete with a name and a logo, a circle with a cross through it, a symbol that would become as infamous as the swastika. The Zodiac Killer was born. He would strike again on September 27, 1969. This time, he changed his method and his location. He targeted another young couple, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, who were picnicking in broad daylight on the shore of Lake Berryessa in Napa County. They were approached by a man wearing one of the most bizarre and terrifying costumes in the history of crime. He was wearing a dark, hooded executioner-style costume, with his cross-haired symbol emblazoned on the chest. His face was concealed by a bag, with dark sunglasses clipped over the eye holes. He was holding a gun. He told the couple he was an escaped convict and needed their money and their car to get to Mexico. But he wasn't there to rob them. After tying them up, he pulled out a long, double-edged knife. He calmly told them, "I'm going to have to stab you people." He then brutally stabbed both of them multiple times. Cecilia Shepard was stabbed so viciously that her intestines were exposed. After the attack, the Zodiac walked over to Brian Hartnell's car and, using a black felt-tip pen, drew his cross-haired symbol on the door and wrote the dates of his previous attacks, along with the words, "by knife." He then drove to a payphone and once again called the police to report his own crime. His voice was the same calm, monotone whisper. "I want to report a murder, no, a double murder," he said, echoing his previous call. "They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia." He then added, "I'm the one that did it." Once again there was a survivor. Brian Hartnell, despite being stabbed 6 times in the back, survived the attack. Cecilia Shepard, tragically, died from her injuries 2 days later. Hartnell was able to provide a detailed description of the Zodiac's voice and mannerisms, describing him as speaking in a slow, measured, almost rehearsed way. The Zodiac's final confirmed murder was his most audacious. On October 11, 1969, he killed a taxi driver named Paul Stein in the wealthy Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. This was a radical departure from his previous crimes. He was no longer targeting couples in remote lovers' lanes. He was now killing in the heart of a major city. After shooting Stein in the head, the Zodiac was seen by several witnesses, including a group of teenagers across the street, as he calmly wiped down the inside of the cab and took a piece of Stein's bloody shirt. The police response to this crime was a series of blunders that may have cost them their best chance to catch the killer. The police dispatcher mistakenly broadcast that the suspect was a black male, not a white male. 2 officers who were responding to the scene actually saw a heavy-set white man walking away from the area, but because of the incorrect description, they drove right past him without stopping him. It was almost certainly the Zodiac walking away from his final murder, a free man. What followed was not more killing, but a campaign of psychological warfare waged through the mail. For the next several years, the Zodiac sent a torrent of letters and cards to the newspapers and to prominent figures like the lawyer Melvin Belly. The letters were a mixture of taunts, boasts, and more ciphers. He threatened to blow up a school bus. He sent a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt as proof he was the killer. He claimed to have killed as many as 37 people, though only 5 murders and 2 attempted murders have ever been definitively linked to him. One of his most famous letters included another, much more complex cipher, the 340-character cipher. For over 51 years, this cipher remained unsolved, a holy grail for amateur and professional cryptographers alike. It was a testament to the Zodiac's enduring, taunting genius. And then, in December of 2020, it was finally cracked by a team of 3 private citizens: an American software developer, a Belgian computer programmer, and an Australian mathematician. The message, like the first one, was a chilling, narcissistic rant. It read, in part, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me." After 1974, the letters stopped. The Zodiac, the killer who had held Northern California in a grip of terror, simply went silent. He vanished. The hunt for the Zodiac's identity has become one of the most intense and obsessive manhunts in American history. Over the years, police have investigated more than 2,500 potential suspects. The most famous and compelling suspect has always been a man named Arthur Lee Allen, a former schoolteacher with a history of child molestation and a fascination with weapons and codes. He was interviewed by police multiple times. He owned the same type of watch with the Zodiac symbol on it. He wore the same shoe size. A friend claimed Allen had confessed to him that he was the Zodiac, but the evidence was always circumstantial. His fingerprints and his DNA did not match the partial samples recovered from the letters and crime scenes. Allen died in 1992, taking his secrets, if he had any, to the grave. In recent years, new suspects have emerged, promoted by independent researchers and authors. A man named Gary Francis Post has been put forward by a team of cold case investigators, who claim to have forensic evidence linking him to the crimes. Another suspect, a man named Paul Dorr, has been identified through linguistic analysis of the letters. But to this day, no one has ever been charged. The case remains officially open. The Zodiac killer remains a ghost, a question mark, the ultimate uncaught killer. He was a new breed of murderer, one who understood the power of media, myth, and fear. He created a persona, a puzzle, and then he disappeared, leaving a legacy of terror that continues to fascinate and horrify us to this day. From the fog-shrouded hills of San Francisco, our hunt now takes us to the modern era, and to the windswept, marshy barrier islands of Long Island, New York. Here, in the 21st century, another phantom killer emerged, one who operated in the shadows of the internet age, preying on the vulnerable and using the vast, anonymous landscape of the coastline as his personal dumping ground. This is the sprawling, and until very recently unsolved case of the Long Island serial killer, also known as Lisk or the Gilgo Beach Killer. The story begins not with the discovery of a body, but with a single missing person. On May 1, 2010, a 24-year-old woman from New Jersey named Shannon Gilbert, who worked as an escort, traveled to a client's house in the gated community of Oak Beach on Long Island. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, something went terribly wrong. Shannon made a frantic, terrifying 23-minute 911 call. On the recording, she can be heard screaming, "They're trying to kill me." She then fled the client's house and ran into the night, banging on the doors of neighbors, screaming for help. She was last seen running into the dense, marshy wetlands that border the community. And then she vanished. The initial police investigation into Shannon's disappearance was slow and, according to her family, frustratingly inadequate. Because she was an escort, there was a sense that she was a lesser victim, that she had likely run off or met with a drug-related end. But her family, particularly her mother Mari, refused to let her case be forgotten. They pushed, they prodded, they kept the pressure on. 7 months later, in December of 2010, a Suffolk County police officer named John Malia was conducting a routine training exercise with his canine partner in the thick brush along Ocean Parkway, the desolate strip of road that runs along the barrier island. He was, coincidentally, searching in that area because of the ongoing search for Shannon Gilbert. His dog alerted him to something. Tucked away in the dense, thorny brambles, he found a skeleton, wrapped in a weathered burlap sack. But the body was not Shannon Gilbert. The remains belonged to another, unidentified woman. This discovery triggered a massive, full-scale search of the area, and what they found was a horror beyond anyone's imagination. In the days that followed, police discovered 3 more bodies, all female, all wrapped in burlap, and all spaced about 500 feet apart along the same stretch of parkway. They became known as the Gilgo Four. They were all young women who had worked as escorts and had advertised their services on websites like Craigslist. Their names were Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. They had all been missing for years. The police now knew they were not looking for a single missing person. They were hunting for one of the most prolific serial killers in New York history. The mystery deepened. As the search expanded in the spring of 2011, more human remains were discovered. Further down Ocean Parkway, police found the partial remains of another woman, Jessica Taylor, who had also worked as an escort. They found the skull of another unidentified woman. And then, the case took a bizarre and complex turn. They found the remains of an unidentified Asian male, dressed in women's clothing. And most heartbreakingly, they found the body of a female toddler, about 2 years old. DNA testing would later show that this toddler was the daughter of another unidentified woman, whose remains were found miles away, in a different county. In total, the remains of at least 10, and possibly as many as 16, individuals were found scattered along the south shore of Long Island, all believed to be victims of the same killer or killers. The quiet, scenic coastline had been a serial killer's secret graveyard for more than a decade. The killer, who became known as Lisk, was clearly methodical and forensically aware. He used burlap sacks to wrap his victims, which helped to contain evidence but also to degrade the bodies. He chose a remote, difficult-to-search area as his dumping ground. And he preyed on a vulnerable population, sex workers, knowing that their disappearances might not be taken as seriously or reported as quickly. But like the Zodiac, Lisk was not content to remain in the shadows. He was a taunter. He made a series of terrifying, chilling phone calls to the teenage sister of one of his victims, Melissa Barthelemy. The calls came from Melissa's own cell phone, shortly after she disappeared. The caller was a man. He was cruel, sadistic. He told the girl what he had done to her sister. He taunted her. "Do you see her? Do you see her in the news?" The calls were brief, all under 3 minutes, making them incredibly difficult to trace. But they provided a chilling psychological profile of the killer. He was arrogant, confident, and he was deriving a sick pleasure from the pain he was causing the family. The investigation into Lisk was one of the largest and most complex in New York history. A multi-agency task force was formed. They looked at hundreds of potential suspects. Was he a local? Someone who knew the desolate coastline intimately? Was he a fisherman or a boater, using the ocean to his advantage? Was he a law enforcement officer, someone with the knowledge to evade capture? The theories were endless. The client who had hired Shannon Gilbert on the night she disappeared was investigated. But he was cleared. A local doctor with a history of strange behavior was also looked at, but no evidence linked him to the crimes. For more than a decade, the case remained stubbornly cold. The killer, like the Zodiac, had simply vanished, leaving a trail of bodies and a legacy of fear. The families of the victims were left in an agonizing limbo, without justice, without answers. And then, in a stunning development that sent shockwaves through the true crime world, the story changed. In July of 2023, the case that had been one of the most famous uncaught killers' mysteries was suddenly, dramatically solved. Police in Suffolk County announced the arrest of a suspect, a 59-year-old architect named Rex Hoyerman, who lived in Massapequa Park, just a short drive from the Gilgo Beach dump sites. The breakthrough came not from a single smoking gun, but from a painstaking re-examination of old evidence using new technology. Investigators were able to use cell phone tower data to link Hoyerman to a series of burner phones that were used to contact the victims and to make the taunting phone calls. They found a hair on one of the burlap sacks that was a DNA match to Hoyerman's wife. And most damningly, they recovered Hoyerman's DNA from a pizza crust he had discarded in a trash can, and it was a direct match to DNA found on one of the victims. The man who had been a ghost for over a decade was suddenly revealed to be a seemingly ordinary suburban dad, a successful architect who went to work in Manhattan every day, a married father of 2. His neighbors were stunned. He was the monster hiding in plain sight. As of this recording, Rex Hoyerman has been charged with the murders of 3 of the Gilgo 4, and is the prime suspect in the 4th. The investigation is ongoing, and he is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But the arrest has finally brought a name and a face to the phantom who haunted Long Island for so long. The case of Lisk is a powerful testament to the tireless work of investigators and the relentless march of forensic science. It is a reminder that no cold case is ever truly dead, and that sometimes the monster does get caught. But what about the other victims? The unidentified man, the toddler, the other partial remains? Was Hoyerman responsible for all of them, or was there another killer or killers operating in the same area? The Lisk case, even with an arrest, is a sprawling mystery that is far from over. And it reminds us of the final, chilling truth about these uncaught killers. For everyone that is identified, how many others are still out there, living quiet lives, their secrets safe, their crimes forgotten by all but the families of those they took? This brings us to our final, and perhaps most gruesome case. We journey back to the Great Depression era, to the industrial city of Cleveland, Ohio in the 1930s. This is a story that feels less like a modern serial killer case and more like a tale from the darkest corners of Victorian horror. This is the hunt for the Cleveland torso murderer, also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Kingsbury Run was a grim, desolate area of Cleveland, a creek bed that ran through a shanty town filled with vagrants, prostitutes, and the desperate, unemployed men of the Depression. It was a place of poverty and despair. And in the mid-1930s, it became the hunting ground for one of America's most savage and elusive serial killers. The killer's reign of terror began in September of 1935, with the discovery of the first of what would be at least 12 victims. The victims, both male and female, were typically drifters from the fringes of society, people whose disappearance would not be immediately noticed. What made these murders so horrific was the killer's signature method. He was not just a murderer, he was a butcher. The victims were almost always decapitated, often while they were still alive. Their bodies were then expertly dismembered, their limbs severed with surgical precision. The cause of death was almost always the decapitation itself. The bodies were then drained of their blood and often washed clean before being discarded in various parts of the Kingsbury Run area. The killer seemed to take a ghoulish pride in his work. The dismemberment was not a frantic, chaotic act. It was clean, precise, anatomical. This led police to believe the killer had to have significant medical or butchering knowledge. He was a skilled dissector, and he was utterly brazen. He would often leave the torsos and the heads of his victims in plain sight, as if displaying his trophies. The city of Cleveland was thrown into a state of panic. The newspapers dubbed the Phantom Killer the Mad Butcher. The pressure to solve the case was immense. The investigation was led by one of the most famous lawmen of the era, Cleveland's public safety director, Eliot Ness, the very same man who had brought down Al Capone in Chicago. But the Mad Butcher would prove to be a far more elusive foe than any gangster. Ness and the Cleveland police were stymied at every turn. The victims were difficult to identify, as they were often transients with no family or records. The lack of a clear motive was baffling. This was not about robbery or sexual assault. This seemed to be about the act of killing and dissecting itself, a kind of horrific artistic expression. The investigation focused on a number of suspects. The most prominent was a man named Dr. Francis Sweeney. Sweeney was a brilliant but deeply troubled doctor and surgeon who had served in a medical unit during World War I, where he had performed field amputations. He was a known alcoholic, and after the war, his life had spiraled into mental illness. He fit the profile perfectly. He had the surgical skills, the anatomical knowledge, and the psychological instability. Eliot Ness became convinced that Sweeney was the killer. He was interrogated relentlessly, and he even failed 2 of the earliest polygraph tests ever administered. But the evidence was all circumstantial. Ness could never build a strong enough case to take him to trial. In a final, desperate act, Ness secretly had Sweeney committed to a mental institution, hoping to stop the killings. And indeed, after Sweeney was institutionalized, the murders stopped. Sweeney spent the rest of his life in institutions, sending taunting, cryptic postcards to Eliot Ness and his family, hinting at his guilt but never fully confessing. He died in 1964. Many believe he was the Mad Butcher, but his guilt was never proven in a court of law. The Cleveland torso murderer remains one of America's most horrific uncaught killers. He was a phantom who preyed on the forgotten, a monster who turned a desperate shantytown into his personal abattoir. Like the Zodiac, he was never identified, never brought to justice. He remains a ghost, a testament to a time of great social upheaval and a darkness that was never fully exorcised. 3 killers. The Zodiac, a media-savvy monster who craved fame. The Long Island serial killer, a quiet predator hiding in plain sight. And the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, a gruesome artist of death. These are the stories that remind us of the terrifying reality that not all monsters get caught. They show us that the darkness is not always vanquished, that sometimes the story has no final chapter. They are a testament to the tireless work of the investigators who hunt for these phantoms, and a solemn memorial to the victims whose cases remain a painful, unanswered question. The hunt for these uncaught killers continues, not just in old police files, but in the collective imagination of all who are captivated by the darkest of true crime stories. Thank you for joining me on this hunt into the shadows. If you have any information about any unsolved case, no matter how old, I urge you to contact the relevant authorities. You never know what small piece of information might be the key to closing a book that has been open for far too long. If this exploration of these enduring mysteries has captured your interest, please subscribe for more deep dives into the cases that continue to haunt us. Until next time, be safe, and remember that sometimes the most terrifying stories are the true ones.